They had only one chance. The enemy was closing in from the hills, their rifles flashing in the night. Behind the Americans stretched nothing but frozen wilderness, except for one path. Their river, but it wasn't water that flowed beneath their boots. It was black, surging current hidden under a thin layer of ice, and that ice was cracking. Captain Michael Harris stared at his men, frost caked on their helmets, eyes hollow from hunger. "This is it," he whispered. "Cross or die." The wind carried the sound of marching boots behind them. They had minutes, maybe less, because sometimes survival isn't about fighting. It's about stepping onto something that could kill you in a heartbeat. The first man stepped forward, rifle slung, boots scraping the glassy surface. The ice moaned under his weight, spiderweb cracks racing out in every direction. "Keep moving," Harris hissed. They went one by one, each breath misting in the moonlight. The sound of ice shifting echoed louder than any gunshot. Keller, the youngest of them, froze mid-step. "Sir, I can see the water moving underneath." Harris forced his voice steady. "Don't look down. Just walk." But Keller's boots slipped, arms flailing. The ice shrieked beneath him, because one wrong step doesn't just kill you, it dooms everyone behind you. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Bullets sparked off the ice, sending shards flying. Men ducked low, crawling on hands and knees. "Go, go!" Harris roared, returning fire blindly into the darkness. The ice groaned louder. Water seeped up through fresh cracks, black and hungry. Every second felt like eternity. Every step a gamble. And then one soldier screamed. His leg punched through, icy water dragging him down. Two men grabbed his arms, pulling desperately. His rifle sank beneath the surface. "Don't let go." Harris shouted, but the ice cracked wider, threatening to take all of them, because saving one life sometimes risks every other. Halfway across, halfway to death, the current below roared like an angry beast, tearing at every fracture in the ice. Harris glanced back. The enemy was on the riverbank now, lining up shots. Muzzle flashes lit the night. He yelled to his men, "Crawl! Stay low." One bullet shattered the ice beside his head, spraying cold shards into his face. And then, in the chaos, Harris realized something worse than bullets. The river wasn't flat. Ahead, the ice dipped downward, thin and dark. It wouldn't hold them. Because sometimes the only path left is the one designed to break beneath you. The first soldier reached the far bank, scrambling onto solid ground. Relief flashed across the men's faces. But before Harris could order the next man up, a deafening crack ripped through the night. The ice beneath the center of the column gave way, and half the battalion plunged into the freezing black water. Their screams echoed across the valley, then cut off as the current pulled them under. Harris froze, torn between rushing forward and turning back. He had seconds to decide. The sound of the ice giving way was louder than artillery. Half the column vanished in an instant, swallowed by the black current. Harris lunged forward, grabbing at one man's pack as he slid under. The soldier's eyes were wide, mouth open in a silent scream before icy water silenced him. Harris pulled with all his strength, but the current tore the man away. The survivors clawed desperately at the ice, boots slipping, fingernails cracking. Cries for help split the air. "Pull them out!" Harris roared. Two soldiers locked arms, dragging one man free, his body convulsing, skin already turning blue. Another soldier reached for a comrade, but the ice fractured further, forcing him back. "Because sometimes saving one man means damning yourself," Keller screamed, as the ice collapsed beneath his knees. His body plunged, waist-deep, icy teeth biting into his skin. He gasped, breath ripped from his lungs. "Help me!" he cried, clawing at the jagged edges. Blood streaked across the ice where his hands tore open. Private Dawson slid across the surface, grabbing Keller by the shoulders. "I've got you!" The river didn't let go easily. The current pulled, snarling beneath them, dragging Keller down inch by inch. His helmet slipped off, vanishing into the dark. Dawson strained until his face turned red, veins bulging in his neck. Keller's head sank beneath the surface. For a heartbeat, only bubbles rose. Then he surged upward again, coughing, eyes wild. They pulled him out, rolling him onto the ice. His lips were blue, his teeth chattering violently. "Keep moving," Harris ordered. "If you stop, you freeze." But Keller's eyes were vacant, his voice shaking. "The water?" The water spoke. No one dared ask what he meant, because sometimes men don't drown, they're taken. Gunfire cracked from the far bank. Bullets hissed across the ice, sending shards flying. The enemy had reached the river's edge, dark figures silhouetted against the snow. Harris barked, "Return fire!" Shots rang out, muzzle flashes lighting the storm. Men crawled low, rifles rattling in their hands. The air filled with the bitter stench of gunpowder and the screams of the wounded. A bullet struck Dawson in the chest. He crumpled onto the ice, blood seeping across the frozen surface. Harris dragged him by the collar, pulling him toward the center. "Stay with me," he shouted, but Dawson's eyes rolled back. His last breath clouded the night. Harris swallowed hard, forcing himself not to look down at the body he left behind. Because in war, you don't choose who you save, you choose who you lose. The ice shrieked as another fissure tore across their path. The river below roared louder, eager for more. "Faster!" Harris yelled, pushing the survivors forward. "Crawl, don't stop." They moved like animals, bellies pressed to the ice, breath fogging in the bitter cold. Every sound was amplified. The cracking beneath them, the bullets above, the screams behind. One man panicked, standing upright. "I can't do this. It's going to break." "Get down!" Harris barked, but the man bolted, running across the ice. With each step, the surface exploded with fractures. He made it 10 yards before the river opened beneath him and swallowed him whole. The water closed like a mouth. His scream was cut short. Silence returned, because sometimes the river punishes fear faster than bullets. Harris's men huddled in the center of the river, too far to go back, too weak to go forward. The storm whipped around them, howling through the valley. The enemy on the far bank fired flares into the air. Red light painted the ice like blood. "Sir," Keller gasped, pointing ahead. "The ice is thinner there. We'll never make it." Harris stared, heart hammering. He could see it too. Dark water shifting beneath a glass-thin sheet. But behind them, the enemy was advancing onto the ice. Their boots echoed like drums of doom. Trapped. Because sometimes survival means stepping onto death itself. Harris's hands shook as he pulled a grenade from his belt. He yanked the pin, hurling it back toward the advancing enemy. The explosion shattered the night, cracking the ice under both armies. Screams erupted as men fell into the freezing dark. Harris turned to his soldiers, voice raw. "Move now! Hey, it's your last chance." They crawled forward, every muscle trembling, every breath desperate. Harris pushed Keller ahead, gripping his rifle like it was the last anchor to life. Behind them, the enemy scattered, caught between icy death and Harris's gunfire. Ahead of them, the far bank loomed like salvation, yet the last stretch of ice was darker than ever. Because the closer you get to safety, the more dangerous the ground becomes. The first man reached the far side, scrambling up the bank. Another followed. Relief surged through the survivors, but just as Harris pulled Keller to his feet, the ground beneath them split. The ice collapsed. Half the survivors plunged into the water. The current dragged them under instantly, screams muffled in the black. Harris grabbed Keller by the arm, pulling him against the jagged edge. "Climb!" he bellowed. Keller clawed his way up, coughing, trembling but alive. Harris tried to follow, but a freezing hand clamped around his boot, dragging him back toward the water. He kicked, firing blindly into the darkness. The hand released. But when he looked down, there was no one there, only black water closing over the faces of the men he'd lost. Because sometimes the river doesn't just drown men, it keeps them. Harris hauled himself onto the far bank, chest heaving, clothes soaked, rifle slipping from his numb hands. He turned back once. The ice stretched across the river like a broken mirror. Bodies drifted beneath it, faces pale, eyes open, frozen in silence. The enemy had stopped on the far side, unwilling to step further. They stared at Harris across the shattered river, their rifles lowered. The storm howled, carrying away every sound but one, a faint whisper rising from the current. "Come back." Harris staggered backward, heart pounding. The river wasn't done with them yet. Captain Harris staggered on the far bank, lungs heaving, heart hammering. The few men who had made it across sprawled in the snow beside him, coughing, shivering, broken shadows of soldiers. He forced himself to look back. He had to. The river stretched wide, fractured into jagged plates. Between them, black water surged, carrying bodies beneath the surface. Pale faces stared up from under the ice, their eyes open, mouths frozen in silent screams. Harris felt his stomach twist. They weren't just drowned. They were trapped, kept beneath the surface like prisoners, and he couldn't save them. Because sometimes survival is just another word for watching others die in your place. The survivors huddled together, trying to catch their breath. Keller sat with his arms around his knees, rocking back and forth. "They're still there," he whispered. "The water? It's talking." Harris crouched, gripping his shoulders. "You're in shock, Private. Focus on me. Look at me." But Keller's eyes flicked to the river. His voice cracked. "They said my name." The captain wanted to deny it, to silence the madness, but in that moment, he swore he heard it too. A faint chorus drifting beneath the wind. "Michael, Keller, join us." Harris's skin went cold, because the dead don't always stay silent. They wait for someone to listen. Across the broken river, the enemy watched in eerie stillness. Their rifles hung at their sides, their faces unreadable in the storm. One officer barked orders, but none of the soldiers advanced. They pointed at the water, muttering, refusing to step onto the fractured ice. Harris realized something chilling. They weren't afraid of his rifle. They were afraid of the river. Even enemies knew better than to challenge it, because when even your enemy fears the ground you stand on, you realize survival won't come from bullets. There was no time to rest. The storm raged harder, winds slashing across the valley. Harris rose, pulling his men up by their collars. "Move," he ordered. "We don't stop here. We keep moving until sunrise." They staggered forward into the blizzard, boots dragging, rifles heavy in their hands. Every step was agony. Hunger gnawed, frost chewed at their faces, exhaustion pulled at their bones. One man collapsed into the snow, refusing to rise. Harris knelt, shaking him violently. "Up, that river isn't done with us. You want to die out here?" The man's lips trembled. "I can still hear them." Under the ice, Harris had no answer. He pulled the man up anyway, forcing him onward. Because the battlefield doesn't just kill, it follows. Hours later, the men stumbled upon an abandoned supply truck half buried in snow. Its windshield shattered, tires flat. Harris ordered the men to scavenge. They found a few frozen rations, a dented canteen, and most importantly, a radio. Hope flickered. Harris yanked the set onto his lap, twisting dials with numb fingers. Static filled the night, then a voice. "This is Outpost Charlie. Report. Over." Harris's heart leapt. He pressed the transmitter. "This is Captain Harris, 3rd Battalion. We've been cut off. Survivors need immediate evac. Do you read?" The static roared. The voice returned. "Understood. Hold position. We're coming." The men cheered weakly, clinging to the promise, but Keller's face went pale. He whispered, "That voice, it's not real." The storm howled, drowning out the radio. Because sometimes the hope you hear in the dark isn't hope at all. It's bait. Harris forced the men to gather wood. They built a small fire against the truck's wreck, the flames flickering weakly in the storm. The survivors huddled close, steam rising from their bodies. For the first time, warmth touched their skin, but warmth also brought memory. They stared silently at the flames, eyes hollow, each seeing the same thing, their brothers drowning beneath the ice. No one spoke. The only sound was the fire crackling and the river whispering behind them. "Come back." Keller covered his ears, rocking. "Make it stop." "Captain, make it stop." Harris's jaw clenched. He wanted to promise it would end. But promises were just smoke in the wind. Because fire can warm your body, but it can't silence the ghosts at dawn, Harris pushed his men forward again. The storm calmed slightly, the valley glowing faint under the rising sun. Ahead, another frozen stream cut across their path. Narrower than the first river. Passable. Harris studied it carefully. The surface looked solid, thick with frost. He gestured. One at a time, careful. The first soldier stepped on, crossing slowly. The second followed. The ice held. Relief began to settle. Then Keller stepped forward. He froze, eyes wide. "Sir, don't you see them?" Harris frowned. "See what?" Keller pointed at the ice. Harris looked down, and his blood ran cold. Beneath the frozen surface, faces stared upward. Dozens. Pale. Unmoving. The same men they'd lost. Their mouths opened silently. And with every step the soldiers took, the faces moved beneath them. Because sometimes the path forward is built on the bodies you left behind, Keller screamed, backing away. "It's them! They're waiting!" The men froze, terror gripping their hearts. The ice moaned, cracks splintering across the surface. Harris raised his rifle, as if it could protect them from what lay beneath. Then the faces below all moved in unison. their mouths opening wide, and the ice shattered. The survivors plunged into the black current. Harris's scream vanished into the storm. The sound of ice shattering roared like thunder. Harris and his men plunged into the freezing current, darkness swallowing them whole. The cold was immediate, crushing, like 1,000 knives piercing their skin. Harris kicked furiously, lungs screaming for air. Around him men thrashed, their cries muffled by the rushing water. He broke the surface, gasping, eyes wide with panic. But the river wasn't just water. It was a graveyard. Pale faces drifted beside him, eyes open, mouths slack. Dead hands brushed against his arms, pulling, dragging, begging. Keller surfaced nearby, choking, eyes wild. "They're holding me. Captain, they're holding me down!" Harris swam toward him, fighting the current. But when he reached Keller, there was no one. Only ripples. Because sometimes the river doesn't drown you, it keeps you. Harris forced his body forward, the current dragging him toward jagged rocks. His muscles screamed, every heartbeat a hammer of pain. A soldier bobbed beside him, eyes glazed, lips whispering soundlessly underwater. For a terrible moment, Harris swore he heard the words in his head. "Stay with us." He shoved the body away, rage and terror twisting inside him. Not today! With one final push, he clawed at the icy edge of the far bank. His fingers slipped, nails tearing, blood streaking the frozen surface. Then he felt hands. Real hands, 2 survivors, faces gaunt and pale, pulled him onto solid ground. He collapsed in the snow, coughing up river water, shaking violently. He turned, scanning the river desperately. "Keller!" But Keller was gone. Because in war you don't just lose men, you lose pieces of yourself. Hours later, Harris and the last handful of survivors stumbled into the shelter of a rocky ridge. Their bodies were broken, their souls heavier still. They lit no fire. They ate nothing. They only sat in silence, listening to the storm fade into calm, but silence was worse, because beneath the calm the river still spoke. "Michael!" Harris pressed his hands over his ears, trembling. The whispers weren't fading. They had followed him, and deep inside he knew why. The river hadn't wanted them all. It had wanted him. Because sometimes survival isn't mercy, it's a curse. Days later, an American patrol found Harris and 3 survivors wandering the valley, half frozen, half mad. They carried no gear, no rifles, only hollow stares. Back at base, Harris gave his report. A frozen river. Enemy fire. Men lost to the current. But in his journal, scrawled in a shaking hand, he wrote something different. The river doesn't just take. It waits, it whispers. It remembers. No one believed him. They stamped his file, called it frostbite delirium, the ramblings of a desperate captain. But the men who had crossed with him never forgot. And some nights, when the wind howled just right, Harris still heard Keller's voice calling from under the ice. "Come back." And so the question lingers. Was it the storm, the enemy, or the river itself that claimed those men? Because in the Korean War, not every battlefield was marked with trenches and barbed wire. Some battlefields were rivers, and those rivers never let go. If this story chilled you to the bone, don't let it sink into silence like the river. Subscribe to the Soldier's Journal for more Untold. Korean War mysteries, like the video if you believe the lost deserve to be remembered, and comment below. Do you think it was the enemy, the storm, or something far darker that took them? Because every answer only leads to more questions.